Yeah, if not, I guess we can skip. Let's just give 1 more minute and then we get started. That's all right. Okay. Let's start. So, welcome everyone. I'm not sure if there's anyone here for the first time that would like to introduce himself. Looking through the list, I don't think so. We all know each other. Okay, welcome. On the agenda items for today, as I was mentioning earlier, we don't have someone that can walk us through the recent changes. So this is still open, so someone wants to do. I have the open J9 from Chetan, release status, Vincent, artifact store. I assume it's Chetan, and logging startup activation sentinel from David. If I missed anything from the agenda, feel free to let me know. So, Chetan, do you want to lead us into OpenJ9?
Can you provide the context? I am forgetting that part.
So, yeah, no worries. Let me just get to your email. You mentioned OpenJ9 in the Java runtime.
OpenJ9 and the Java runtime. Probably that was long time back. I'm not sure on that. I can follow up later on the day.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I was reading a wrong reply. Yeah, never mind.
Okay.
This is funny. Vincent, do you want to talk us through the release status?
Yeah, sure. Let's see if I can share my screen. Oh, desktop. Okay. We'll play. So, can you see my screen?
I can see it.
Okay. So this is current status and future plans regarding the release for our OpenWhisk project. Yesterday was really a very great and final day for the first release of OpenWhisk on the Apache as incubator projects. I received enough votes for the very last 2 vote emails about all the 6 runtimes. So I sent up the release, updated our website, sent out the I still need to send out an announcement to both Apache general list and our dev list as well. Sure. So far we have all the 12 models which we were discussed like a few months ago as the first release for OpenWhisk projects. So currently we have all the 12 modules download available, already officially released on the Apache as OpenWhisk project. Here we can see the 2 snapshots I took from our official OpenWhisk.org website. And we can download all the source code artifacts for all the 12 modules. Yeah. So we won't go one by one anymore. So thanks everybody for the great work. Thank you so much for the great efforts about the development of the participation in this open source project. So after this milestone, what shall we plan for the next release? What shall we plan in the future? Here is some bulletins I can think of. If in the future, definitely each repositories, we can also call it module, can be released individually, which means every project can have anybody can plan on a repository basis, and they may release in frequently, or they may release in a slow pace. So that's up to each project. So, but we definitely need to follow the Apache release process, as I have done during the past few months for other modules, like picking up the Git number for each project, and then generate artifacts, push them out to the SVN repository of Apache, and then send out the vote emails, counting the mails, send an announcement, or even we may do in multiple iterations if we are not lucky. So that's definitely one future plan for the release, individual release on the repository basis. And second, which is focusing on the main module, it's about kind of version. I think it should be part of the version management, since the OpenWhisk campaign like runtime, the CLI and CLI to specific versions. We should definitely do that in the future release, instead of pinning to latest always, because the latest, finally, the old version will fall behind the latest. So latest should be changed to a specific version in the future. And the third could be, it would not be the first time of the release, so there will be a changelog. So everybody should be aware of that. There should be a changelog file, including all the changes comparing to the previous release. This is definitely applicable. It will apply to the 12 existing modules. But for new modules and new runtimes, we can still plan for the first release, but it's also on a module basis, so they can plan its own release. And the fourth, I'm thinking of have one artifact including all the modules. Purpose is to offer user a kind of convenience. They can have a one-stop download of all the modules. But we definitely need more discussions in our community, like whether this one artifact should include the runtimes, because runtimes are kind of special. We can have, so far we have 6 default runtime, but we can have more. We have 7, we can have even 10. So the number is dynamic, it's dynamically increasing. So whether we should include runtimes is the first question. And also runtimes, as you know, runtimes are released on a different version number from the OpenWhisk main module. So how shall we cooperate with that? To me, I don't think it makes any sense we package all the things which contains like 0.9 of the main module, but 1.12 at the runtime. I don't think that really makes sense. I think a unified version number, like for example 2.0 or 1.13 for all the modules, and then this artifact contain all the modules inside. That will make sense and more straightforward for the user. Otherwise, we will mess up all the version number and tags, which I don't think I don't hope that will happen. And yes, this is also about what kind of modules we shall put into this one artifact, and how do we align the versions of different modules. This is kind of two concerns and two questions I have so far. And last but not least, it's kind of a knowledge transfer, because in the future we have, actually anyone can become the release manager of a certain module. So we'll draft instructions documenting all the processes I have walked through during the past few weeks and even months, telling folks how to use our OpenWhisk release tool, for example, how to kick off the traffic shop to do the release process for us, and then how to prepare the mails, how to counter those, how to react to the community, etc. So this is all I have for today. So just one question mark left for community is that how do we plan this kind of one artifact for our modules? So whether it should include runtimes, and how should we deal with the version numbers? Yeah.
Great. Thanks. So I mean, I think from question of whether they should include runtimes or not. So if the objective of a unified artifact to download is that someone can actually download all the source code and get it to work together, then I think you have to include the runtimes, at least some of them. The system won't work without the node runtime, for example, because that we use that for the health checks. All right. So if the goal is to provide something that someone can download and they get a complete, they could build OpenWhisk entirely from source, I think you have to include everything.
Yeah,
in fact, version numbers are different. You just have to deal with that.
Yeah, I agree. And that was the plan initially as well. I mean, especially since we don't have formalized interfaces or definitions for what constitutes compatibility for runtime.
Right. And then there's a second artifact which might be useful for users, which is the the Docker Compose or the Kube or the OpenShift or the Mesos project for a particular version, where what they would do is they would download just that one project, and it would pull all the binary bits that it wanted to out of Docker Hub, right? Which is realistically how most users will probably use a release of OpenWhisk. They're not going to download all the source code and build it from scratch. They're going to download some meta project that deploys it on their platform.
Yes, that's why I list like specified version of the dependencies for the OpenWhisk core. So as long as we pin the runtime like in OpenWhisk core to a specific version, it will actually pull the image and install them automatically.
Right. So there's probably a step for the next round of releases. There's probably something where we work from the leaves up to the root of the dependency tree, get all those pinned and built, and then we put out the various deployment projects as well.
So Dave, I thought that one time we were talking about rolling it in Kubernetes into the main OpenWhisk and bringing it in, and having a discussion about how do we come lean and mean, and how do we get rid of things that we don't support very well. So I mean, what are our main? Are we going to continue? I mean, this is a question for Dragos and everyone else as well. What's the future of Mesos? What's the future of OpenShift? I know OpenShift is mainly there for learning's sake, to see how we can push ourselves more towards to the extreme ends and have unified runtimes and base images and things. But what's the future look like? I mean, is that something we need to spend time on? I'm just worried about spending time on creating something for all these deployments that we have when we're actually going in a trajectory where we're going to be unified under some kube deployment. I mean, what comes first? I mean, are we not going to merge kube into main OpenWhisk? I think that's been a public discussion as well.
I don't know. I mean, I think it could go either way. I guess if you look at the if you want to think of it as a deployment project, where we have several different platforms we want to deploy on, and each of those has their own little relatively small project that talks about how to deploy a bunch of binary artifacts, then having kube be separate is useful and parallels the other ones. We could also pull them all into the main project, and so then you grab, the main OpenWhisk project with a ton of stuff you don't actually need to deploy binaries.
Right.
I don't know what the right model is.
So you're saying that there's something in between, something like a package.json for the whole project.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I mean, what do you think, Dragos or Tyson or other people who do deployment or operators?
So, yeah, I also replied to Ben's question. He sent a few days ago how people deploy this and stuff. I think for us right now, at least in the Adobe context, we are quite far away, far along onto a successful method deployment. And for us changing, it wouldn't necessarily benefit the users, but I assume, and I let my colleagues to keep me honest here, that we see, like, we want to move with the community, and community being in Kubernetes at some point in time when we're not pressed to push some features out, we will be swapping transparently for the user with users with Kubernetes. Okay. Not sure if Tyson, if you have anything else to add.
No, I think for the question of what to do with the repos, whether they're all separate or all included in the master, is just a management question. I don't think it has any real implications for us. We'll be deploying on Mesos for the foreseeable future. So as long as stuff doesn't go missing, unfortunately, there's some technicalities with the Mesos, the public Mesos deploy repo that are problematic for us to use internally. So, I think it doesn't, in the end, it doesn't really matter whether those things are in the master repo or as separate repos. I'm not sure I understand the discussion of moving those into the master repo, but I don't have a strong opinion either way.
Right. I think there's probably not much point to moving them right now. I think the thought was it would make them more visible. Like you just go to one place and you would see how to deploy everything. But if we do a better job of documenting that if you want to deploy on Kubernetes, you get this project. If you want to deploy on Mesos, you get this project, and it derives everything else, then maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So like the quick starts should all point to the operator platform of choice, and they can go from there, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, conceptually, a lot of people have kube deployments. We've got Minikube, and it's becoming a support nightmare, supporting all the different deployment options to easy up, quick install. The idea was perhaps since kube has reached a maturity level with Minikube, that local development deployment, maybe we could push towards that. It's a matter of support. The community, we don't have enough people to support all these things. That's my concern.
Right. Yeah. So I guess the question is, can we get rid of some of the Vagrant or Docker Compose or other local mechanisms that? Okay.
That's an interesting question. So basically, the proposal, if I'm hearing correctly, is to try to develop locally with Minikube. Is that the proposal? Yeah.
Well,
I think there's a couple of complicated things here going on. One is organizing repositories and maintaining code to make sure it's up to date. The other one that's somewhat related, but it's technically pretty separate, is what's the default dev environment that's going to be easiest for people to get up and running on? Like right now, it's Docker and Ansible. Would it be easier or benefit the project in general if we threw away all the dev flavors and just had one, and if that one is Minikube? I guess I'm in the same boat on that, where it's like I don't have a strong opinion. I use Docker and Ansible for development right now because I know that's the one that gets the best coverage, and that doesn't. I don't use it for deployment, but and I think the same would be true if that goes away in favor of using Minikube or whatever.
Right. I mean, right now the Minikube environment is a little bit it's harder to work with debugging because the processes are running inside of the Minikube VM. So it's not as convenient to attach debuggers to them as it would be locally. So that's something we'd have to work out. So maybe Matt's high level point is we should probably have a small number of local dev environments, ideally one, whatever that is. Right now it's Ansible, and then the deployment ones that we actually really want to support. And if there are obsolete deployment options, maybe we need to start getting rid of those.
Yeah, I would frame it as a question of what is going to both be simple for developers to use as well as get the system tests ported to using in the ongoing Travis builds. So like, I think a lot of people like to use Docker Compose. What's the reality of being able to use Docker Compose in the Transible system test runs? If we can do that, then maybe we can get rid of all the other ones and just use Docker Compose. Or, I mean, I'm saying Docker Compose. I don't really, just saying that one because I know a lot of people use it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, conceptually, I mean, it is about testing as well. It's not just the dev environment because it's production. We see general cloud providers having Kubernetes as a service, and if we can have the same set of Helm charts or set of Helm charts to deploy locally and in Kube environment, then we have the playground problem solved, where we can say, here's our sets of tests, pick your favorite Kube as a service, go run them, and as long as we, like you said, as long as we bring all our tests over and make them available. But Dave has some great points in terms of tooling, debugging, logging, and I think my team has been talking about how do we help Dave do those things in Kube out of the box.
Yeah, I think maybe if we could get to the point of parity in the Kube environment for debugging and whatnot, maybe that's having the next step in that conversation is once we get there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that would be something that we could, that maybe Matt's team can help us is looking at what it would take to get parity for the debugging and development experience in Kube.
Right. Yeah, we're starting our plan, and I've been talking to Dave in the background, and we're gonna have a meeting in a couple of weeks to figure out what our priorities are. And Kube is definitely on a top list of things to do. Besides, the other thing is not a topic for today, but how do we get better visibility for our community in terms of use cases and other things, case studies. So look for me to be, and Adobe and Red Hat and others, we need our websites devoid of case studies and scenarios, and we need those things. So that's something we need to beef up, I think, as a community as well. So two major areas, Kube improvements and improving our visibility as a project in terms of what we can be used for.
So I assume when we speak Minikube, we also assume that we install Knative in Minikube. I know some people are looking at installing Knative.
For one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a separate thing, right?
Yeah.
But it's turning the ship. It's turning the ship and getting more developers to help us. I mean, that's the whole about resources. It's not just about the resources we have now. It's about attracting new resources. And if we steer the ship to show that we're a mainstream Kubernetes deployment option, both locally and remotely, we might get those extra developers to help turn the corner and get more people on board to do the things we want to do.
Another nice thing that would happen if we standardize, let's say, on Minikube is maybe people develop also CloudFormation templates or other things that make it easy to even deploy an OpenWhisk in Amazon.
Right.
Sure.
Yes, if you can come up with a general way, a way to host your provider services, host your other containers that have your different databases, your logging systems, or whatever with that. So you can see a whole community of Helm charts being developed around componentry that complements what we have in the base platform.
So is anyone actually driving, or we're still, or how do we get to a decision?
Well, I mean, like I said, this is something that we feel we need to do in IBM, and we need to work with Dave and others in the dev list as we formalize some of these ideas and proposals and prioritize.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think we're not ready to make any real decisions yet because there are gaps, and so I think Tyson's point about trying to close some of those gaps, working with the community, and then figure out, are we ready to switch over or not? Because right now there are definite debugging and tooling gaps.
I think that's the next step. Is my plan is after my vacation to come back and meet with Dave and our team, and we're starting to compile some of these issues and hopes and dreams, and then once we have them compiled and stuff, we'll share them with the community and see what everyone else wants to add to the list, or say +1 or -1 or whatever.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern is if anybody is really attached to any particular dev environment, like I'm going to cry if Vagrant goes away. What is it that can be, can make their transition smoother, or like what's missing from any single environment that they can't switch to that?
Well, I think that's the point. The dev list discussion will be an early indicator for them to speak up. And if they really are that concerned, then maybe they want to maintain it.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Sounds good.
All right. I was just looking to see if dev list is. I'm not sure how many people are on dev list or versus opening an issue and discuss it publicly in GitHub.
We can do both. I mean, we can post the list and put it like that.
For sure. Yeah, I think both.
Yep. Okay.
All right. So should we move to the next item, or are there other items on the release status? Okay. So the next one that I have, I'm skipping Chetan. Chetan, by the way, I saw you sent an email on October, I think, or not October, September. Sorry for that. I was confused. David, you had something about logging sentinels.
Yeah, so I've been doing a little bit of work. That's not what I wanted. Notes. So this is just, okay, can you see a presentation now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, this is a pull request I've been working on for a few weeks, and I just wanted to give people a quick update on where it was and what it's trying to do. Was that loggy? Sorry, it won't advance. Wow. All right. PowerPoint is frozen, sorry. The whole machine is dead. All right, maybe let's talk without slides. So what this is about is open the discussion on the dev list maybe about a month ago of trying to get the logging code to be more self-contained. In particular, right now, when we log, you have to get the logs from user containers. The invoker is involved in that path. So the user container runs, it spits out stuff to standard out and standard air. That goes through Docker or Kubernetes or something. And we then extract that portion of logs, and then we basically have to process it line by line to add the activation IDs into it, so that then we can feed that into a logging service, and the users can then query, like, show me the log for this activation ID for this namespace, right? And because we're doing that sort of post-processing in the invoker, we both put load on the invokers, and we also stall freeing that container out. So we have to wait till we can do that log processing before we can reuse that container for something else. I think James posted something on the dev list a couple days ago, actually, about an improvement for that protocol to try to do a better job of keeping track of what's going on there. So what I've been playing with in this pull request is basically, we already had end sentinels in the managed runtimes where we stick out, the XXX, this is the end of a Whisk activation. And so what I've done is prototype putting a start sentinel in as well. So it's the start of a Whisk activation with activation ID, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the logs, and then it says end of the Whisk activation. And if you do that, then those logs are self-contained. So you can just run a tool over them, post-process them, and extract the activation, do that log enrichment of putting the activation ID with the log lines individually. And so what's in the PR is basically some changes to the test suite and the invoker, some of the filtering, log filtering, to ignore that start sentinel when it's there. And then there's a package called FluentBit, which is a cut down version of FluentD. So FluentD is a log processing agent that's written in Ruby. It's pretty heavyweight. FluentBit is a pretty lightweight thing written in C from the same people that does a very smaller subset of that kind of processing. And one of the things, and so basically what I've implemented in FluentBit is something that tails all the log files in a directory, looks for these sentinels, does the log enrichment, and spits it out. And it does that using by using a little script written in Lua. And so if we actually look at the PR, what I've got in the slide deck that is now dead in the water is basically, there's a pretty small configuration that says tail the stuff, run the Lua script, stick it out into a single unified file on another directory in the disk. And then there's about a 30-line Lua script that goes through and keeps track of all the activation IDs for all the files it's tailing, and injects those into the logs. So anyway, so that's the state of the PR. It's basically working. Then there's 3 PRs associated with it. There's one to the core. There's an example for the node runtime to show how that works. And then there's a deploy kube thing that actually deploys the FluentBit daemon as a daemon set and does the log processing. I guess I just wanted to tell people about that and maybe get some feedback about whether, should we push ahead with this? Is it okay to merge this? What are people's thoughts? And also, so the other option is to go for structured logging entirely. And we could pursue that instead or in addition to this. So that's it. I'm sorry about the presentation. I'll post it, but it's basically just pulling bits out of the PR to show to people.
Dave, with this change, the invoker still needs to know when a container is being expunged, or when it can actually expunge a container, since logs could now be asynchronous and outside its lifecycle management?
Yeah, so what this would do is basically, I guess there's already, I think maybe Tyson did this, there's a logging SPI implementation that basically says don't worry about the logs in the invoker. So it basically outsources the log processing to an agent that runs externally.
So what happens if the invoker decides it just needs to kill the container and spawn a different one before the logs have finished training?
The logs would, so what I'm assuming is that the logs are going to a disk somewhere, whether Docker or Kubernetes, and so that container exits, the logs are still there until the underlying platform gets rid of them. All right, so I'm reading the logs off of the disk, not relying on the fact the container is still alive.
Right. I guess as long as those files are around. If they're the Docker log files that it generates, then those get expunged with the container.
Okay.
So there might be, I haven't thought very deeply about this, but there just might be some sort of synchronization where you want to make sure that log file stays around even though you've expunged a container. The reason the end marker sentinel was there is that there's a flush synchronization issue. The Docker log driver doesn't flush immediately every time it sort of outputs, every time the container, the process inside the container generates log messages. So you have to know when you're done. So that's when we came up with the log sentinel. We would just wait for that. I don't know if your change also addresses that, but I think there's a little bit of subtlety there, maybe to think through with respect to the invoker then reclaiming containers.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's good. I've been mainly looking at it in the context of Kubernetes, because part of my motivation for looking at this is getting the logs through the invoker on Kubernetes is incredibly slow.
Right.
And so there we really have to do something else.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. It's just, if the invoker is still managing containers in the way it is today, I think there's a little subtle detail there to work out.
All right, yeah, that's a good point. I did not know that those logs were removed so aggressively.
So in this case, where does the log message end up? I'm sure you mentioned it. Like, So Fluent Bit, I guess I'm not familiar with that. So that collects the logs and then parses them and stores them in the activation data store or someplace else.
No. All right. So yeah. So sorry, I don't have the PowerPoint. So what Fluent Bit is just a really lightweight log processor. So it has a tail input, so it can read files out of a directory, bring them into a stream, process them, and then it has several different possible output plugins. So one of them is just write them to a file on disk and let someone else deal with it. You can stream them to standard out. You can also upstream them to either a Fluent D daemon or to Elasticsearch or to some other logging protocol directly. There are about half a dozen plugins it has. And so the model, you're pulling it off the disk, you're doing this enrichment, which is very OpenWhisk specific, and then you're throwing it upstream, ideally directly to your platform logging service, but maybe you have to stick it in a disk or some other intermediary first because Fluent Bit doesn't talk the protocol that your upstream logging protocol does.
Okay, so this is the same thing as Fluent D. That I've just never heard it called Fluent Bit.
Okay, yeah, it's from the same company, and it talks the Fluent D protocol, but it's much smaller and limited. It's basically a very fast, very lightweight. So Fluent D runs 40 plus megabytes of an image. This image is just a few megabytes. And
so where are the parse to log messages getting sent in your setup?
So the setup I have right now, I'm just writing them to a disk into basically a single unified file on a disk. And then we have another, we have another setup to read that disk file and send it to our platform logging service. You could also hook it directly to Fluent D. I just haven't done that.
Okay, so they're not going to the activation store? Is that
right?
True?
So in this setup,
okay.
Right. So getting the invoker out means they don't go to the activation store. Instead, you would get the user logs by asking your platform logging service. We could actually choose to write a plugin that would basically post-process this to the activation store if we wanted to. I think we're finding at IBM that writing all the logs into the cloud end is a real bottleneck, and so we're moving away from that. Yeah.
So just to let you know where our logging system diverges a little bit is we use FluentD to collect logs and transmit them to a Splunk instance, and then part of our log store. So that I guess this is a question for you, is that part of our log store configuration will use a Splunk query to fetch the logs when someone uses the Whisk CLI to try and get the logs for an activation. Is that type of thing handled in this case?
I haven't done that in this PR. I think James has a PR floating around to do basically how to get the activation ID API answered out of an Elasticsearch API. Is that right, Carlos? You might know this better than I do.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, or you could potentially get it out of the logging, some other logging service directly. But yeah, basically support that API by not going to Cloudint, but by going to the logging service.
Okay. We've run into one kind of fishy caching problem that I'll bring up offline. So I think for now, if people use this logging approach, they won't be able to use the Whisk CLI to get their logs.
I think the intention, at least with the PR from James Dubey, is to have an Elastic storefront the activation metadata so that you still use the Whisk CLI and the OpenWhisk API, and it translates those queries into Elastic queries to retrieve the data from Elastic. I haven't looked at that PR in some time, but that was my understanding of it when I did look through it. So you don't necessarily have to change the interface from the OpenWhisk end user's point of view. They can still use the CLI. Now that said, whoever's hosting Elastic can provide a Kibana dashboard and their own API to Elastic, so you can bypass OpenWhisk. But in terms of the user experience, I think it doesn't go in the sense of dividing or bifurcating that user experience.
Yeah, okay. I haven't seen this PR, so I'll take a look for it. It's James DB, is that right?
Yeah, I had one thought both for the Splunk and this work is there are activations which are written by the controller. These are for sequences and conductor actions. At some point there should be a unified story that also deals with those. Whether it's for Tyson or Dave, has there been any thought on what to do with those?
Right. I think those probably ought to go to the logging service as well. I thought I'd seen some PRs in progress to do that for some of the controller.
I thought that should have already been handled by the log store SPI, but if it's not, then
not in the controller. That's what Dewey is looking into to make those two log entries, one for sequences and one for the trigger fires.
Yeah, that sounds like just a bug in the log store SPI.
Right. And I guess another, a meta question, which I don't know what the right way for us to answer is this whole start sentinel thing. If we generated structure logs to begin with, we wouldn't have to fool around with this particular start sentinel. We'd have a bunch of the other issues. And so, do we want to just go towards structured logs entirely?
So for that one, I created an issue which kind of is meant to deal with the root issue of doing that. And the main issue I see with doing that is that all the runtimes currently rely on environment variables for contextual metadata passing from the invoker into the runtime per activation. And that's a problem both for concurrency and for structured logging, but it really gets amplified when you start talking about concurrency.
Mm-hmm.
That one's issue 4020. We've put some workarounds in place for the Node.js runtime that we use to get around that. That might be usable for making something backward compatible while that changes. But I would want first to kind of establish some agreement on how that's going to change before pushing that along. But I think one of the key issues there is to stop using environment variables and how we move past that after that's done.
Okay.
So a quick comment on sequences and conductor actions. We're just discussing the logs in the logs for these activations are built by the controller. As you said, I think another interesting difference is that in contrast with just regular invocations, these logs are built over potentially much longer. So this is a small amount of logging information, but it logs the steps of the sequence or the steps of the conductor. And conceptually, this is something that would be really useful to have incremental access to. So not just being able to look at the log once the activation is over for the sequence, for instance, but potentially having access to the log as it is so far. So I know this is beyond the discussion here, but this may be something to keep in mind here.
Well, I think that's important. Where the part of the goal of the log store is to, at least for us, is to be able to have a per log event kind of concept of log messages, and get away from the notion of buffering log messages into memories and then persisting them out in bulk. So this would, if we keep that in mind with whatever changes that are going in for enabling the controller to use the log store, I think that's, we should certainly be able to accommodate that, where it's like each log message is streamed out separately and not as a bulk kind of dump of log messages that have queued up in memory.
Right, that would be great.
Right. Yeah, I think it's definitely where we have to get to for the platform, is that the log messages just stream from line by line. They stream from where they're generated to where they're going with minimal touching and processing, and definitely no bulk processing along the way. And so the The question I don't know how to deal with is, do we decide that we're just going to commit to a structured logging approach, even though that's a user-breaking change, because that makes all the rest of this possible, or much simpler?
My impression is that a lot of people would be open to have structured logs. I'm not sure if you want to vote on this or just bring it on the
Bring in the dev list,
yeah,
user list. Yeah,
it might be just very easy to just get alignment there. I was going to mention something that I noticed from teams building applications on top. So because OpenWhisk only gives you the logs when you know the activation ID, there's no free text search. I noticed this team building like a medium to large size app, streaming their own logs in Logly. And they do this because they can do free text search. They can have maybe monitors. So just something to keep in mind that if we plan to just export, like if we don't plan for a search capability, which puts load, of course, on the logging system, I think we should try to keep this maybe simple and assume that people in production will not really go unless they have an activation ID of an error. Otherwise, I can't think of a reason why I would look. So I would look when I'm in development or when somebody tells me that there's an error and they give me an activation ID, and I would check what's wrong with the function.
All right, so that's all I had, Dragos, unless there's more discussion around this. I guess maybe we can take to the dev list this question about, can we push to structured logging, and I guess we need to get some user input to that somehow too. I don't know what the best way to do that is, because many of them are not on the dev list.
That's a good question. I assume, like here in Adobe, we can reach out to the team that we know of and just ask. Sorry, you were talking about OpenWhisk, not developers that write functions, but like more like operators that play OpenWhisk.
Operators, and also, I guess, from the operators indirectly for their customers, right? So if we change so that you have to use structured logging if you want to actually see your logs, it's disruptive to people who already written applications. Right? So how do we manage that?
Oh, but Whisk activation logs, can't that not filter? I mean, read the JSON format and then only print the messages.
Right. I guess we could do some incremental path forward where a particular runtime said it was doing structured logging, so we could treat it differently. Right. You'll have to take the screen away from me because my Zoom is completely locked up, so I can't unshare.
I don't know how to do that.
You just share yourself and it just takes over.
All right, so this was on the agenda. It looks like we're running with the time. Is there any other upcoming work that you'd like to share or talk about, or any other things you want to share?
Just quickly before you pick another moderator, Pretty's in the call, but in a couple weeks, I'm sure she'll have some things to share. But we have an issue open that we WhiskTech deploy, where we've had several what we call patterns that we're trying to use just WhiskTech deploy to deploy lots of things. And right now, if you're aware of WhiskTech deploy, we're on a package basis, so we have dependencies. We can pull in other packages. That all assumes that they're actually packages with a package.json file and a manifest type of thing. So we ran into a use case where people want to copy files locally to become part of a zip action, or even pull from remotely. So she's adding what we call an include-exclude feature. So as part of the processing pipeline for creating the zip action, we can actually have formalized references to these files to copies and which ones to exclude with wildcards. So we have an issue open if you're interested. We have a set of use cases we've collected from several sources. And if you have additional use cases, go to that issue and submit them and watch the PR when she's able to get some work done on it.
Yep, I just sent the issue number in the chat, so feel free to send any comments. I'm working on a PR. I was expecting it to be done today, but still working on it.
So the primary use case is that you have some library you want to reuse, but it's not a package, a JavaScript library or some library files, some utilities, some set of functions that have not been formalized. You can copy them in and reuse them in multiple actions.
Now, one thought about that, I'll comment in the GitHub issue, but one thing that I see maybe it's related to this is a feature that I think is coming up more and more as I talk to folks using Whisk Deploy is the ability to have something generic. We had this in Apache Cordova called hooks. So npm also has this concept of pre-install and post-install. So it's basically just a command that gets executed before the deploy.
Yeah, we talked about it as an internal tooling pipeline with plugins. That's something that's been on our to-do list since the beginning, but we just had no time to implement a generic tool chain. So
So I think if you're going to invest effort, I would say it will be more worth and more powerful to have something generic that you do pre-install. It's just you put a string and you execute that, and if it's 0, if it's not 0, then you're stopped. And then after you deploy, you run post-install, and that will buy a lot of use cases. So those are my 2 cents. Instead of doing some custom zipped or tar or DGZ or moving files or splitting files.
Yeah, we're trying to address most of the use cases. We're not ready to open up a pipeline yet. We're having 99% of the use cases, I think. So we need concrete examples. I think we want to be use case driven. So if we have a tool or some function we're not doing now, we'd like to examine what we can't do. And just opening up to a generic pipeline, that's a lot more work. It really is a lot more work.
Okay. I mean, yeah, the concrete use case is just run npm build, and that will do my webpack minification, moving files, create the zip, get everything ready for Whisk Deploy. So Whisk Deploy is not in charge of creating the asset. But yeah, let's discuss more.
Let's discuss more. Yeah.
This is great. I also use Whisk Deploy everywhere, and it's working fantastic. I just found an issue recently that I'm going to open. I didn't open it because I didn't want to add extra workload, but I'll just open it and hopefully see if I can fix it. It's about having empty strings as default values, which then get used as actual values in a sequence. So I'll provide the use case. But
cool. Thanks.
It's working really great.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
All credit to Pretty.
Thank you.
All right, given that we're short on time now, let's pick up our next moderator for the next meeting.
I think there's a good chance I can do it. I can't get to my calendar to be sure.
It'll be the 26th, right?
That's the 10th, I guess?
October 10th, sorry.
Yeah. I think I can do it. If I have a problem, I'll let you know. But for now, put me down.
Okay.
Thanks, David.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Dragos.
Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.